When you begin to think that way, your life changes. And that's what happened is I said, God's given me a law degree. He's uprooted my family. I never intended to leave Cincinnati. I didn't want to go home. And so my question was, Lord, what do you want to do with this mess that exists? I'm not where I wanted to be. I got this law degree. I'm obviously not cut out to be a lawyer, I guess, maybe so. So that set me on that journey of saying, what do I do? And ultimately, the sense was, use it in this arena. So here I am, 30 years later.
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nellen.
I'm Sean Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful you're joining us today. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. You can reach me directly by emailing Matthew@tnchristian.com.
Or Sean, SHAWN, @tnchristian.com.
Our scriptures for today are from Ecclesiastes, the 2nd chapter, verses 14 through 18. I know that whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God doeth it, that men should fear before him. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. And moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. I said in mine heart concerning the estate of the sons of men, that God might manifest them, and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. Our guest today is David Fowler, who will soon be retiring from the Family Action Council of Tennessee. David has been a friend to this show and to me for a long time, almost 5 years. And I say that is a long time because to us it is a long time. It's near the entirety of our existence at Conservative Christians of Tennessee. But to David, it's just a fraction of his public life, his public service, and of his Christian testimony. The truth is that David has been a giant to many of us in Tennessee, and we stand on his shoulders and the shoulders of other men who came before him. But he's our connection to so many things, and he has explained and extrapolated and guided us through so many biblical principles. He's done consistent work over decades to educate, to legislate, and to transform our state, and we'll always be thankful to him for his work, especially on Amendment 1. David, welcome to Faith in Action.
It's great to be with you all. I appreciate the work that you're doing. It's always nice to know that there are people who come behind you, who are continuing to press forward. And, that's just an important principle that sometimes we forget in Christianity, that we were made to be historical creatures. Honor your father and your mother is the concept that we take from those who've come before us. We honor them by taking what they've taught us and then continuing to mold, develop, refine what they've taught us, that the kingdom of God expands, that the glory of God moved forward.
I don't think we've ever done this with you, and
Okay.
I think it's incredibly important. Can you share your faith testimony with us, how you came to know Jesus and what his lordship has meant in your life?
I'll never forget, my mom and dad took me to Concord Baptist Church when I was probably 8, I guess, to hear this well-known evangelist. I don't remember his name, but he was well-known to them. And I remember coming under the conviction of my own sinfulness, even at 8 years of age. And I was baptized at the age of 9. And I don't know that I fully understood what I was doing. And in fact, at 66 years of age, I don't fully understand what I'm doing either. That's part of sanctification. The highlights, I guess, of my faith journey is that in 1989, I was in a large law firm practicing in Cincinnati. My life had been a portrait of success, president of the student body, outstanding junior, senior man, law scholarship, and my law firm said to me right as I approached the partnership year that some of the partners were concerned with my commitment to my religion and my family would interfere with my commitment to the practice of law. And we'd all heard this saying in law school, and they repeated it. Law is a jealous mistress. It demands your time. If you're going to excel in it, you have to study, read, work. And we'd had our daughter, Allison, and she was 2. And I made the fatal mistake of not coming to the office on Saturdays if I didn't have work already to do that needed to be caught up on. And so They said, you can convince us that you fit here, or, we'll help you find another place. So I came home a week later, make a long story short, decided that that was not who I wanted to be, not who I was. And I remembered the story in Daniel that, God will save me. And if he doesn't, I'm not going to bow down to be the big city, big firm lawyer. So that was a kind of a crisis of faith, the first that I'd really ever had. I quit, didn't know what I was going to do, didn't know if I should remain a lawyer, came back to Chattanooga, but the experience forever shaped me, because in coming back to Chattanooga, I sensed that Chattanooga was a very religious city, but church was what good people did before they went home for dinner or went out to the club for dinner. There was not a deep substantive reality to it a lot. And so asking some questions about that led me to join an organization there whose byline was Chattanooga, a city for God. I never thought of, could a city actually be known as a godly city? So as I started into that work, I felt God saying, I gave you a law degree, not to practice law, but to use it in the public arena, to combat the lawyers that were twisting law. I mean, here I was in 1991, and I had never thought about whether Roe versus Wade was bad. I just learned that that was the law. You just went with what the law was. You never said, well, if that's the law, to heck with that. It needs to be fixed. So that's when I decided to run for office, ran for office in 2006 against a 26-year Republican incumbent that nobody had run against in 16 years. But some friends of mine had convinced me that he's the kind of guy that needed to go. He was the classic rhino, a Republican chairing the education committee in a democratically controlled Senate chamber. So my first time out of the box, I said, okay, Lord, here we go. I'm going to follow what I think is your call. We'll see what happens. And lo and behold, oh, wow, you're not supposed to win, but you won. What do you do now? But what was wonderful, just to give an example of how God puts people where he needs them to be, 1995 was the year that we amended the state marriage statute to make it clear that the licenses went to men and women. Previously, we'd never said that because everybody knew that's what it was. Yeah. Because of things happening in Hawaii, we changed the law. Then we began to work on the marriage amendment. But in 2001, the Tennessee Supreme Court found a right to abortion. It was in our state constitution. It was of a greater strength or vitality in our Constitution than even under Roe versus Wade. So we had no laws. And I was there to initiate the charge to change the Constitution to say there isn't any right in the Constitution. But in 2006, I was really frustrated. The pro-life amendment was getting killed in a pro-life state with lots of Christians. Christians were unengaged. And I thought, what do we do? So the next step was the Lord, in my mind, said, I've given you all you need to know to understand Tennessee politics. Now use it going back to speak to the church and tie the two together. So I left after 12 years and started the Family Action Council of Tennessee. And I've come to the conclusion that there are things within the church that need to be done, and people need to be discipled in this area.
Right.
Otherwise, we'll go about doing what we think are righteous deeds, but in God's sights are filthy rags. And so that's why I'm leaving.
This is something we encourage on this show, putting your faith into action, learning what to do, seeing the need, and going and doing it. And I ask so many people often to get involved in politics. The blank stare comes back, and you can feel the dread welling up inside of them. I don't want to do that. That's a nightmare story for so many people. What's the selling point? How did those friends come to you and convince you that, hey, we really feel like you're qualified to lead our state in a better direction?
Well, not everybody is called, certainly, to run for office. It's kind of like there are people who have the gift of evangelism. Others, they don't have that gifting, or administration, But here's the thing that I have said to many, is that we all know we're supposed to be stewards. Unfortunately, what the church tends to do is reduce stewardship to pietism, being holy in your personal life. But I would say everything we have from God. We have no authority and we have no power. The distinction between the two is quite important. Without authority, power gets abused. But authority without having any power is useless too. But I'd say all authority comes from God, and we are called to steward it the same as we would our money, time, our talent. And in our form of government, that's not given to a few, where the rest can just go about their business and say, we're going to trust the nobles, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Authority is delegated. God has sovereignly allowed authority to be delegated to us as individuals, who then turn around and take God's authority and redelegate it to another person. And I've said, and not without some grief from my fellow politicians when I press them, and I do. Now, I treat the Christian professor different than the non-Christian. But where I have made an enemy of myself with some is to say, I don't want you, Representative so-and-so, to stand in front of God. And when he says, why did you allow babies to be killed? Why did you let Bob go by Bobette and go in the girls' locker room? I don't want you to say, well, Speaker McNally was opposed to it. He thought it would hurt the economy. And God's going to look at you and say, I don't know Randy McNally. Who's he? And then I said, and the reason that I press you is I don't want to stand in front of God. Now, my justification is a different issue, but my stewardship of the influence I've been given, the position I've been put in, is to say, and I don't want to stand in front of God and say to Jack Johnson, to Jeremy Faison, to William Lambert, well, I didn't press them on restoring marriage and defending life because, they control the flow of legislation. And if you're not on their good side, then you can't do good things for you, God. And he says, who are those men? I don't think I know them either. And I said, I don't want to stand in front of God and say, I gave you influence, and David, you didn't give them the truth because you thought this world could operate apart from me through them.
Yeah.
And when you begin to think that way, your life changes. And that's what happened is I said, God's given me a law degree. He's uprooted my family. I never intended to leave Cincinnati. I didn't want to go home. And so my question was, Lord, what do you want to do with this mess that exists? I'm not where I wanted to be. I've got this law degree. I'm obviously not cut out to be a lawyer, I guess, maybe so. So that set me on that journey of saying, what do I do? And ultimately, the sense was use it in this arena. So here I am 30 years later.
That's a great testimony, David. You talked about the difficulty essentially in connecting with some of these leaders, getting them to do the right thing. What would your advice be for younger men who are wanting to get involved in politics, who are sick of the pietistic nonsense, are sick of the Jesus juking, which I view as taking the Lord's name in vain?
Yes.
So many people just hide behind an idol of Jesus, not a real Jesus. What's your advice?
Well, it's been hard for me because I've gone through a transition with the legislature. When I was there, I was in the middle of the war. I was in the middle of the caucus, meetings, and God gave me an influence, a sense of authority there, even though I didn't hold a, quote, leadership position. I wasn't the majority leader, the caucus chairman. But, one of the things Jesus does is he says, I have all authority. Okay, so I'm going to be with you. And the people said of Jesus, he spoke as one having authority. So when those people knew me, I could go to certain people in leadership at the time, particularly the Republican side. The Democrats didn't care. And I could say, this is a bad thing. Don't do this. And most of the time, they wouldn't. And I would try to help them figure out how to be against the thing without looking, mean or heartless. Or I would say, if you're going to pass this, change the language. This is not well worded. But now there's nobody left in the General Assembly that really knows me or has worked with me other than Randy McNally, who really, to be honest, can't stand my guts, never has, didn't like me in the Senate. And Rusty Crowe, who I love Rusty Crowe, sat next to him for, 10 out of my 12 years. But Rusty vacillates, So there's nobody that will pick up the gauntlet and say, we really ought to listen to David, okay? So I lost some of that influence, I speak and it's kind of like, I don't care. And besides, you've now made me mad. I think that there are fewer Christians in the General Assembly than we think who know who Jesus is. Because if I believe that all things are for our sakes, even the obnoxious David Fowler who comes in and says, I can't believe you're going to let little boys into girls' bathrooms. And they don't go home and say, wait a minute, I don't like the way he said that, but that is what I'm doing. Then I don't know if they know Jesus. I just don't know. Now, that's hard to say. I'm going to treat them like it as long as they profess.
Right.
But I've had to learn that one of the best things you can do sometimes when you're a Christian is to just ask questions. I used to do a little seminar where I said, the eyes of Jesus were, he illustrated things with parables, right? He interpreted the scripture when it was appropriate. and he asks interrogatories, a good lawyer word.
Right.
And so sometimes it's disarming, as Jesus demonstrated, when you say, well, help me understand, is this your principle? And they go, oh, wow. So if you're for this, would you be for this? Well, no. Well, then I don't understand. Those kinds of things can be disarming. Now, that can still make the reprobate angry, just like it did the Pharisees. But you have to get past that. That's part of the answer, is if Jesus has all authority over everything, I'm not going to make somebody do what they don't want to do.
Right.
The Holy Spirit has to work at some point, and sometimes I think I push too hard. So just let it go and turn them over to God.
It's interesting. You said that there are fewer people in the General Assembly that are Christian than we think. I tend to agree, but there's something interesting in Florida. The PCA has a ministry to the state.org where they actually have missionaries to their, what is the equivalent of their General Assembly. They don't have one in Tennessee that I'm aware of.
They were recruiting for it at the last PCA meeting in Tennessee. They were actually asking people to get it started.
I attend a PCA church. I love the people that I'm with. I love the history of Presbyterianism in America, and that's one area that I don't think we're authentic to our history in. And I think that's changing, but it's not going to change through the institutions. It's going to change through the ruling elder side of things, not the teaching elder.
Yeah.
What authors and what books, David, have influenced you the most?
I hate to disappoint book retailers, but a lot of the stuff that I really thoroughly enjoy, I find online. One of the things that literally God used to change my life about 5 or 6 years ago, from tending towards the legalistic side, was a book by John Owen called Meditations and Discourses on the Glory of Christ, or you just search for it, The Glory of Christ. It's not a long book, but you can probably find it multiple places, but it's at monergism.com and Christian Classics
at the Real Library. Yeah, CEL.org. Yeah.
But when I read that, I realized I had not seen who all of Christ is. I saw him in a salvific way, in terms of soteriology, but not in terms of the larger cosmological implications of who he is, which then changed my eschatology. And I often tell people, if you don't get the first 2 chapters of Genesis right, you won't understand what's beginning to happen in Genesis 3 with the fall. And then you'll get your eschatology wrong, the final end things. And so cosmology, soteriology, eschatology all have to hang together. And the modern church has sucked soteriology out of the foundational cosmology, which now has everybody wanting to escape the world rather than to fulfill the first purpose of the first Adam, which is to be completed in the second Adam. Yeah. So that creates a pietism. I'm going to be holy and I'm going to escape.
Yeah.
And we don't realize a new creation has come about in Christ, who is a new creation. There has never been a God-man in the whole of one person in history. It's an incredible thing to contemplate. And I began to see that. So I think where we fail today is that if we really developed in the church an understanding of who all Christ is in a cosmic sense and all the implications of that, everything would change. And that's what I'm really leaving to do, is to say, if you start out saying, I just want to fix the law, I just want to fix the legislature, you're starting in the wrong place.
Right.
Yeah.
You're starting partway down the road and you don't know where the road began. And so you don't know where it's going to end. And you'll wind up doing things that look righteous, but in God's sight are filthy rags, which do not bring about righteousness. And I think that's some of the problem that I see. But I would also say, we've had ministries down at the legislature, but they were all pietistic.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I specifically had them say, well, how did y'all discuss in their group how the Bible relates to this issue of such and such? Well, we don't talk about that.
Right.
It's kind of like, well, if there's something your Jesus doesn't talk to or talk in relation to, then I don't know who your Jesus is.
That's right.
Yeah. And David, man, there's been an issue in the church at large in America, in our circles, about the last month that has just been getting under my skin. I know it's been getting under Sean's skin. It's kind of making me a little despondent, but most people think that Jesus exists to make them a little less sad. I think really that's most people's idea of salvation's effects when we're here on earth, make you a little less sad while you're on earth and then go to heaven. And there's no glorious drive there. And I have appreciated you because you have always advocated for a vision of Jesus as Lord of everything. So I really appreciate that. I think that's really when you talk about the foundations of the world, the eschatology and the soteriology, you're saying Jesus is Lord of it all. So I really appreciate that. What is next for you? You're retiring from the group you founded, Family Action Council of Tennessee.
Right.
Where do you go from here?
It's really odd. I hate to say this, but I told my board, I don't care if the organization continues to exist after me. There's no sense of pride or achievement that my legacy would somehow be tarnished if they said, it's been a good run, we're closing it down. You know, many churches would do well if they'd say, this men's ministry just doesn't need to exist in this form anymore.
Amen. That is
Or the
so
ladies'
right.
circle. It was great for its time, but we're prolonging a dead thing. Now, I'm not saying it's dead. We still need to be speaking truth to legislators. But my heart began to realize that, as I just said, we tend to start teaching people law or about politics before we've grounded them in a right understanding of what the ancients would have called metaphysics and cosmology. What's the fundamental truth about existence, about anything being? That's metaphysics. And then cosmology is, well, given that, what kind of place is this and what's it for and what are you supposed to do with it? I gave a little example. If the metaphysic of the world was a hammer, that's the source of all being, then I'd say, well, I guess my purpose must be to be a carpenter. And the way things work is you hammer things together. That's how the world works. Now, that's a silly example. But if Jesus Christ is the firstborn of all creation, as it says in Colossians, and he's the firstborn of the new creation, that with him is truly a new creation coming into existence that's never been there before, then that's our metaphysic, and everything has to revolve around who we see Christ to be and what offices did Christ hold as prophet, priest, and king, and how does he still administer those offices? So how does our work in politics relate to that? Once we get that down, then you're ready to talk about law. Because what we see is law is like this thing that comes in and you just apply it and it fixes things. And like, not if the world's a certain kind of way, it won't fix anything. Okay. So we treat politics like a machine, but we've been raised that way. The world's just a machine. It just operates by these random laws of nature, whatever else it is. Now I'm sure about these laws because we've looked into the void and found that there's things we just don't know, so we embrace nihilism. But if we'll just replace the part, then it'll all work well. So if we get rid of that politician and we pass a new law, the machine will work. We don't live in a machine. We live in an organism.
Right.
So what happens is, if we're not combining the gospel of who Christ is and who all he is with our advocacy of law, then it's not going to work right. And I have been studying Romans 5, 6, and 7, where he makes it clear in Galatians, the law, righteous law, only stirs up sin. It causes more offense. And I've looked and I've said, yep, that's true. Look what happened. We reversed Roe versus Wade, which we would say, well, that's a good positive step forward. And what's happened? We've essentially lost all the abortion ballot issues since then. Now, we won in Florida only because they had to get 60% of the vote, but the majority voted pro-abortion. Why?
Right.
Because righteousness stirs up the sin in a population that is unregenerate. That doesn't mean that we don't push for the righteous law, but if we think that righteousness comes by law, we haven't read the book of Galatians right. But because the world is an organism, to put the emphasis on law without also the preaching of the whole person of Christ, your organism doesn't work right.
That's right.
Okay. And so that's what I'm seeing is the church has so failed to teach people who Christ really is and the implications of that are cosmic in nature, that our emphasis on law isn't working. But if we only preach who Christ is and don't see that that relates to law, then we've still messed up the organism.
Right.
What I'm wanting to do is to say, I want to so ground you that if God is calling you to politics, you'll know how to do it. Mm-hmm. He may not be calling all the people.
Thank you for teaching Sean and me that the law is pedagogical. You really hammered that in, and we've grabbed that and run with it.
I've been blessed to do it. You throw the seed, And some will say, I got to know more. And
Right.
if it's just those two people, one of them may be president and chief justice of the Supreme Court someday.
There you go.
Yes. That's phenomenal.
That's what I'm looking forward to. And, people may say, well, you're going into obscurity. And I thought, well, didn't John the Baptist say he has to increase? That's the goal.
Amen.
Yes.
Not me to increase. Thank you, gentlemen. Y'all are an encouragement to me. Thanks so much. Have a great Christmas.
You did the
You
same.
too. That's going to do it for another episode of Faith in Action. And we are thrilled to talk with you each week in Nashville, Memphis, Clarksville, and all over Tennessee as we talk about more ways to put your faith into action. Folks, if you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to 5 years of past shows. You can listen to a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and all of the Mid-South region. And until next week, remember, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.